I know one person who hasn't. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but I'm not going to point. Let's put it that way. I know who they are. But is there anybody else for whom this is the first storytelling event? Oh, thank you for coming. I'm curious. So, how did you find out about this?
Lisa told us.
Okay.
We're having a girls' weekend. We're we had some story time. We created the weekend.
Wow!
Party time.
Story party.
It all works.
That's fabulous. Well, we're glad to be a part of your family. And how did you hear about this? That's why we have a friend.
Yeah. We won the first 5 tickets.
And I know Cindy. Yeah. And was everybody else over here who was new? Yeah. How did you hear about it?
She told me.
Yeah! It worked. Yeah, that's great. Well, welcome to everybody who has been to a storytelling event and those who haven't. Just a little housekeeping, washrooms, if you haven't been there yet or don't know where they are. Back there, straight back and then to the left. And then exits, there's the one you came in, and then there's one through that door as well, should we need to leave for some reason very quickly. We will have a 10-minute break. Margaret, our storyteller, will be telling one story, but it will be the first half of the story, the second half. And so when we take our break, there's some water in the back with some cups, and there are cookies in all pre-packaged cookies, just COVID ready. So, having done that, I would like to now present you present Margaret Murphy to you. It's a pleasure for us to do that. I think her storytelling will be a way better introduction to her than I could give, but I'm going to do a little try. She has spent over 20 years researching, creating, and presenting stories about amazing and courageous women through history. I don't know, what are you trying to tell me?
I just sort of
Thank you. If anybody put their phones on you, that would be really wonderful.
Thanks, Mercy.
I thought Rachel was asking if she could videotape it. I'm like, I'd have to ask Margaret. I don't know. I don't know if she was well. So anyway, she's thrilled to be back here in the MAC telling live, and we are very thrilled to have her. The story tonight that Margaret's going to tell is called Remembering the SS Princess Sophia, and it was originally developed in 2018, but tonight is a revisit of this story with a 2022 twist. Apparently there's some more nuggets that Margaret has mined or dove for. And Margaret hopes with this story to honor the ship, the people who traveled on her, and the many who helped her, as well as a very special Alaskan lady, Captain Annette Smith. At the end of the story, there'll be a short question and answer period for anybody who wants to stay for that. And obviously, if you have to go, that's also fine. You can leave and then we'll do that afterwards. And that's all I have to say right now. Margaret, thank you.
I can't tell you what this feels. Well, I can. Wow, lovely to see you. Yeah, it's amazing to be back live here. Back at the MAC for sure. Back at the MAC and back live with the beautiful faces that I can see and breathe with. It's so wonderful. Thank you, Susan, for that intro. And Marva, always, ever thanks for this work that you do. Yeah, the SS Princess Sophia, and ladies love that it's the weekend here with the group. The Sophia, Noel and I had the joy, Noel's in the front row, he's got this cushy seat. And we had this, you come early, you get the cushy seat. And we went up to Alaska many years ago. And I connected with a woman who said, you need to go to the new State Museum. And I said, well, there's a lot going on and I think we'll just see what unfolds. No, you need to go to the State Museum. And over the years, have been doing this, as you say, Susan, 20 plus years. And when you get tapped, sometimes you listen now. Well, I do. It does take a few taps sometimes. And the longer I delay it, the more urgent the tap. So I've started to listen, and we went to the museum and there was an exhibit on the Princess Sophia, a ship. And I had never heard of her. And there were all kinds of missing pieces in the cabinet. And I didn't like that. There were some beautiful dishes from the Sophia, and I was like, bells went off, and I said, oh, those, I remember those. So I asked about the Sophia, and one thing led to another. I have to tell about the Sophia. And in that time, that was 2018, Sharon Easton's at the back. We were sitting at what was then called the Rusted Rake, which is a great little place in Nanaimo. And I said, I don't know what's going on, but what I feel is that the ship is saying something, that it's not my fault. And I said, that's ridiculous. What? And I kept hearing, it's not my fault. And I said, I need to run with that. So in 2018, at the launch, it was through the voice of the ship, which was moving for me and unusual. But time happens to all of us, and stuff happens. And what happened was a canoe connection and an incredible woman named Annette Smith. Annette Smith is a Alaskan, and she is a remarkable woman who dives and runs her own excursion company and does underwater photography. And with her permission, she has juiced the story for me. And with her permission, it will be framed in her voice. Remembering the Princess Sophia. Boats, fish, and the sea. Boats, fish, and the sea. They're my world. For the last 20 years, I am at my happiest when I can combine all three. And I love being on the water and in deep water. Years ago, I discovered deep sea diving, and my world was transformed. And I loved that energy in the water. I love the movement, and I had to capture it. So I started taking pictures underwater, and I became an underwater photographer. But that didn't quite capture the movement. And so I started taking films and videos underwater. And now I travel the globe. I've got my own boat, and I take people on a variety of excursions. But I am at my happiest deep below water. And I've been doing it for a long time and a lot of places on the globe. But my all-time favorite is coming back here to the same site and the same ship. I'm drawn to her. Well, some people call it an obsession. I call it a fascination. I'm fascinated with it. Well, I've been down over 200 dives. Yes. But I've made a point of not only diving, I've researched everything I can about her. I've looked at all manner of publication, book, article. The interesting thing is there's very little on her. Why? Because her story has been forgotten. The people on the ship have been forgotten, and that is not right for me. So I, tonight, need to remind you and me about Sophia. But just as you were, if you were coming on my ship, on my boat, let's call her, there are some ground rules, some foundational information that you need to have before we launch. I want you to know her full name, her history, and her purpose. So, welcome aboard. Her name is the SS Princess Sophia, the steamship Princess Sophia. Yes, her name sounds so regal, so royal. Well, her lineage, her name is anyway. Sophia, was named for Princess Sophie, Queen Victoria's granddaughter, whose father, no less, was the German Emperor Frederick III. Hence the pronunciation, the Princess Sophia. But I just call her Sophia, and she seems quite happy with that. Now, Sophia's life began in 1911. There was very little shipbuilding going on here in Canada, so most of the orders were sent over to Scotland. And in particular, it was Paisley. Bow and McLaughlin were the shipbuilders in the early 20th century. The Canadian Pacific Steamship Company, that's our CPR, but it was the British Columbia Coastal Group who put in the order for 32 new ships, 4 of them coastal liners, of which the Princess Sophia was one. Oh, and she was sweet. She was. So she was ordered in 1911, built in 1912, and came around the long route, all the way around South America, all the way up to her home port here on the island of Victoria. A few bumps and bruises on the way, but she started her life. 245 feet of her, 44 feet in the beam. Solid, though. Solid, sturdy, reliable. Those were words that were used to describe Sophia, because she was built for these waters. And if you want to negotiate these waters, you better be solid and sturdy and reliable. But she was also trim. She could negotiate those narrow inlets, different passages. So she was sturdy, reliable, she was comfortable. Sophia had a wonderful observation deck and lounge, obviously, right at the bow, with exceptional windows so you could appreciate the scenery, of course. And if any of you have gone up that inside passage, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But she had many public rooms, a bar, a social hall, paneled in mahogany and walnut, no less. And all the public rooms were decorated with wide, comfortable leather chairs and solid oak tables. Oh no, she was well liked. People wanted to ride on the Sophia. Her dining hall sat 112. But on the fully booked rides, well, you had to come in certain times. And the food on Sophia was above average. It was delicious and plenty of it. A lot of background to get to my story. But you need to know it, because this information is the vessel itself, and it's the container for the story, just as a ship is the container for all the hopes and dreams of those that travel on her. I get excited. So, Sophia was built for the waters, and she traveled from Vancouver to Victoria, right all the way up to the canal, the Lynn Canal in Alaska, up to Skagway. Her main route, though, was that inside passage, May through October. Always May through October, and then in reverse. And during the alternate times of year, she would ferry people back and forth between Victoria and Vancouver. Sophia, when I think of her. But you need to know about the events of 1918 and what occurred, because that's what this story is about. It was October 19th, 1918. Vancouver, Pier D, in Cole Harbor. And she was about to leave. She was heading out on her final voyage of the season, because this was late October. As they watched the stern lights leaving, there was a lad on the pier who had just missed the boat. And he wondered, I missed it. But no, fate steps in sometimes. So off she went on her trip over to Victoria, and then following the inside passage. First, of course, stops in Alert Bay, Prince Rupert, and then on up into Alaska. Sitka, Ketchikan, then Juneau, and all the way up the canal to Skagway. Well, in October, the weather was similar. It was raining, and that's no surprise at all for that time of year. And so off they went. Very few passengers on board, of course. Most of the people were up in the top of the canal, waiting to come down out of the north so they could start whatever it is they had planned. And then all these different events unfolded in a quick sequence. She went slowly into Vancouver, from Vancouver to Victoria. And then there was a call, a distress call from the SS Ulysses. There was problem up at Alert Bay. Well, Sophia was not loaded and thought, she's ahead of schedule, she can certainly go ahead up. So she went up to assist the Ulysses, who had been grounded on a rock. But when she got there, it had totally, was able to free itself from the rock. So there was absolutely no problem except for a snag at Alert Bay, at which point the captain said, well, we can certainly make up time and get up to Skagway without any problem. And so they did. They made their way up to Skagway and arrived on October 23rd. It was a relatively uneventful trip, except the very big difference was there up in Skagway. Skagway, have you been up? Skagway in 1918 was very much, well, was alive that day. I mean, this was the end of the season. There were people coming from all over the north. They were getting ready for the big exodus to come down to the south. And the great sourdough dance had just taken place the day before. That great exit dance where everyone who is anyone up in the north attends the dance. Oh, it was chaos literally at Skagway when they arrived. There were people everywhere. There were men, women, children running around, and animals on the pier. Yes, animals. And of course, cargo all over the place because people were getting ready for the great exodus south. Well, the train was also late. The train from Alaska was also late. And then it connected with the train in Yukon, the White Pass train. And it was all delayed. So all the passengers that were coming in originally from Dawson were delayed. Now, who were these people? You might be wondering, who are these people getting on that ship in 1918? Well, there were two groups, basically. There were the seasonal workers, the miners, the loggers, the fishermen, who would come down at every freeze up and then go back up north at the end of their holiday or at the end of their session. So the other group were those that were leaving the north permanently, those that were saying, enough, we need a gentler climb. And there were many of them. Sophia was fully booked at that time. She could take on 250 passengers with a crew of 60, but she was overbooked, probably with 300 passengers. We'll never know for sure, and none of the research indicates which number, because, well, there were stowaways, there were people that came and went on the ship. There was a new change of crew, and the captain put that over to the crew to sign on the new members. And really, they could not definitely say what the numbers were for the passengers. So passengers are largely made up of those two groups, the residents that are saying goodbye to the north permanently, and those that are leaving just for the season. Willie Barnes. Willie Barnes was an example of one of the lads who said, enough. Willie was 45 years old, had been a miner up north, and he said, I've made my fortune, I've made my goal, it's time. He wasn't traveling alone. He was traveling with Billy, Willie and Billy traveling together, and Billy had 4 legs. Billy was his faithful horse. And yes, she's comfortable and she's practical, but Sophia also has room on board for livestock, facilities and capacity for livestock. And on that run, Billy was there, along with 23 other horses on that final run. Let's not forget the family pets, 5 dogs. Willie Barnes was ready to find a gentler climb, he said, in Vancouver. And he sold up everything and headed south. Another group, the largest of the family units, were the O'Briens, Bill and Sadie O'Brien and their 5 children. They all had similarly said, enough, we need a new start. The O'Briens were really well-known residents of Dawson and were active in the social circles. Bill was quite an official there in government, and Sadie was involved in a lot of different community activities. They were traveling with their 5 children, ages 2 to 14. There was another couple from Dawson, and you might be hearing Dawson a lot in this story. 10% of the Dawson population was on that ship. Wow. 10% of the Dawson population. Another couple from Dawson were Lulu May and Murray Eads, but much more about the famous Lulu May. shortly. So that gives you an idea of who was on there. And there were first class and different levels for accommodation. That's the passengers. Now the crew. In the wheelhouse, in charge, was the master of the ship, and that was Leonard Locke. Captain Leonard Locke was well known and a seasoned mariner. 25 years on the West Coast. He was up and down those waters, knew it like the back of his hand. And his first mate was Jeremiah Shaw. Now, Jerry Shaw was about 20 years younger than the captain, but equally good at the wheel or on the ship. He knew his way around the Pacific Coast waters. And then there was Arthur Goss, who was second mate. And Arthur Goss and his brother, and I need to share that story because Arthur Goss and his brother Walter were both here from the island in Victoria. Both loved to dance. And I share that because, well, Arthur and Walter went to a dance that night on the 19th before they signed on in Vancouver. And unfortunately, Walter was not quite as conscientious as his older brother and took another little tour on the dance floor. And he's the one that ran on Pier D, trying to make it all the way there on time for the ship at 9 p.m. But he missed it. Fate, decisions. But his brother Arthur did sign on and was the second mate. Third mate was Alfred Murphy. And not much is known about Alfred, but he was 45 and eager to get out on the water. Now the crew, largely, well, all of them were male. Jimmy Chang was the cook, and he had a staff of 11, but they would never identify the staff of 11. In those days, they just set it out and said 11 Chinese workers. Now, of the 65 crew, all were male except one. Her name was Charlotte Helen Browning, known by Helen. She was from England, 35 years old, and had been stewardess on the ship for 5 years. She loved it. She loved the Sophia and loved the people. And she was a master knitter. And she would knit up mittens and socks and scarves and then raffle them off to all the passengers. Oh, they got to know her. And then they wouldn't even turn them over or keep them. They just gave them back to her so she could raffle them over and over again. Why, Helen made thousands of dollars. Not for herself. She sent it over to the boys overseas. So that's a glimpse into the crew. The cargo. Oh my, if you've got people leaving the north permanently, there's going to be goods, household goods, packages, all kinds of furniture, in addition to horses and dogs. But there was space on board. But that pier, by judging from the pier was like a long bowling alley and it was covered. Captain Locke took one look at that pier and thought, I can't possibly get all those people and those items onto this ship. Certainly not for a 7 o'clock departure. Now remember, the train was late. You have all these people, and he's a very fastidious, strict captain. 7 o'clock came and went. They were still sitting in Skagway. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock came and went. It wasn't until 10:10 that Sophia pulled out of the Skagway pier, full 3 hours behind schedule. There was a fine mist that developed into a rain that night as they pulled away from the pier. And all seemed fine, an easy start to the final run. Oh, people were excited. They were excited. They were full of their hopes and dreams of the new future. What's around the corner? Well, what was around the corner was the Lynn Canal. About an hour outside of Skagway, right around Battery Point, is a body of water called the Lynn Canal. Now, the Lynn Canal was named after Captain Vancouver. He had called it Lynn after his delightful Norfolk town called King's Lynn in England. Well, I'm here to tell you there's nothing remotely similar to a quaint little town in that Lynn Canal. Oh, at the best of times, it can be treacherous. It can also be magnificent in terms of scenery. Now, it is the longest, coldest fjord in North America. The Lynn Canal can be at a depth of 2,000 feet in some parts. It is a great channel with glacial water and rock jutting out on either side. Narrow, not more than 10 miles across at any given way. The Lynn Canal has many challenges, and one of the main challenges, right in the middle of the canal, is a reef, an outcropping of rock that is basically the top of a mountain. It's half an acre in size. This is 1918. The marker was a small black marker at the south end. On a nice clear summer day, hardly visible. But once they rounded Battery Point, Sophia came into a fierce snowstorm. The snow came down heavy and thick, and the wind picked up, and now the seas were churning. And the captain and the crew made the decision to go full steam ahead down the canal. Now, there were two ways of determining ships' position in the canal at the time. One, of course, obviously, compass. The other was called echolocation, or ship's whistle. So you would sound the whistle, and you would wait to hear it bounce off the rock. And the distance and time it took to reach you would give you an idea of your location in the channel. Think of that in a stormy night. So Sophia was coming down the canal, full speed ahead. And now she was half a mile off course. I want you to leave the canal now in that winter storm, and I want you to come with me on board the ship. And we're on the upper deck, the boat deck, and we're walking down the corridor towards the first class staterooms. Let's stop outside of stateroom number 44. There's someone on the other side of that door that I want you to meet. Mrs. Lulu May Eads. Lulu May Eads. If Sophia is a fascination for me, an honorable mention needs to be made of Lulu May Eads. She represents the spirit of the North for me. Lulu May Eads was not Alaska born, but she certainly had every ounce in her of the spirit and the heart of the North. Lulu May was a Southern belle. She came up from Alabama in 1898. Gold rush fever called her right up to Dawson. She could sing and dance. She was a wonderful performer. She was a woman with big heart and big spirit. And she came up and got a job right away at the Floridora Saloon. Oh, she was an entertainer. And she treated everyone the same, no matter who came in or who approached her. Her spirit was one of welcome. No matter the miners, the loggers, Now Dawson in those days was humming is the word. 18,000 people, banks, stores, there were all manner of activity in Dawson in 1898. Well, of course, gold rush fever, they were coming from all over the world. There were two very different societies in Dawson at the time. There were the bankers and the merchants and the lawyers and the doctors. And then there were the floaters, they called them. Here are the men who worked in the mines largely, and they worked on the ships, the stern wheelers, they worked on the rails, they worked in the logging camps and on the fishing boats, the floaters. But society was built to entertain the floaters. Now, Lulu at the Floridora Saloon fell in love with her boss, Murray Eads, and he with her. He was a sharp businessman, he was, Murray. He was a little slow on making decisions, however. It took him till 1904 to propose to her. And she quickly said yes. She knew a good thing. They were a great team. And she turned around and said, we need to change a few things around here. Yes, we welcome a lot of people, but I think we could welcome even more. How about changing the name from the Floridora to the Royal Alexandra Hotel? And that's exactly what they did. Was Murray going to say no to Lulu? No. And she hired on all manner of people and brought in the ladies and treated them all like family. No matter who came to the door, they were treated like family. Well, there were so many people that started coming to the Royal Alexandra. I mean, miners, of course, the loggers, all these different folk up north. But even one you may know, Robert W. Service. Yes, he used to work here on the island, I know, in, I believe, a Bank of Commerce. Well, he ended up at the Bank of Commerce in Dawson and was a frequent guest at the Royal Alexandra. What was that? One of his poems, The Shooting of Dan McGrew. Now, the first stanza, some of the boys were whooping it up at the Malamute Saloon. The kid that was handling the music box was banging a jagtime tune. But back of the bar in a solo game sat Dangerous Dan McGrew. And watching his luck was his lady love. The lady known as Lou, you're right. Lulu. She put them together. And from that moment on, Lulu insisted that she was Robert W. Service's Lou. That myth still holds. And do you know, even to this day, they're saying, well, if she was Lou, was Murray Dangerous Dan? For years, Murray Eads tried to get his beloved out of Dawson. She'd have nothing of it. She said no. No. Why? There's a whole world out there, Lulu. Why? No, I can't. Why? My dream. My dream. My nightmare. And what is it? And Lulu would tell him, I have this dream where I'm suspended and my arms are reaching up high, like high. But Murray, I'm dressed in a long gown with a heavy coat and I'm in water. And you're there. Well, that's good, said Murray. No, you're there, suspended, she said. I'm not going near water. And she wouldn't. For years, she would not go near water. Until 1918, something shifted. And he said, you're ready. They've got this new thing called the Panama Canal. I want to show you the world, Lou. Yes, fine. But if we go permanently. So they did. They bought 2 first-class tickets on the Sophia for that October 23rd. They sold up everything in Dawson, all their holdings. And she came down excited, nervous. And around her neck, a great chamois bag. Bag. No, said Murray, for God's sake, Lily. These are your precious jewels you gave me for all those special dates. I am not trusting this to that safe in that ship. They stay with me, she said. You can keep your money in that safe. You can do whatever you want in that safe. These stay with me. And she got on board with the chamois bag hanging around her neck. October 23rd, she was on that sailing in stateroom 44. So they're sleeping peacefully in stateroom 44. Then we come out onto the canal, and it's still snowing, heavier than ever now. The snow is coming down thick. That wind is blowing from the north. And it is a full winter storm on the canal. As they travel down the canal, they are a full mile now off course. Well, the inevitable did happen. Slammed. Sophia slammed into Vanderbilt Reef. Slammed into the reef. Now, when the impact happened, that boat didn't stop. It lifted up its bow and it lifted up onto that reef and screeched and scraped its way right across until it landed in a crevice and came to a full stop. Can you imagine coming at full speed, 12 knots, and decelerating to such a stop? The entire ship was in chaos. I mean, children wailing, people screaming. Fortunately, it was early in the morning, so that most of them were in their berths, but it was chaos on board. It was full chaos on board. And then, just as suddenly, there was this strange, eerie silence. Broken by the sound of 5 strong blasts from the ship's whistle. Danger. Oh, Captain Locke immediately went into action. He knew he had to send out those lifeboats on their davits. But then he asked the crew, go to see every passenger, every crew member, and check for injury, for any kind of problem, see what they're doing. How are they? What's the ship? He sent them out. Within 15 minutes, he canceled the order. He canceled the order on the lifeboats because they realized they were full and truly entrenched on that reef. They weren't moving. It was as if some creature had picked them up and slammed them down. They were not moving. He immediately called Juneau to let them know that they were stranded on Vanderbilt Reef. Lulu looked over at her husband, looked at Murray, his eyes wide as saucers. She said, nothing. They both looked at each other silently, and he just got up to hold her, and she went over and got those jewels out of the drawer in that top drawer and slung them around her neck and held them close. She lay down on the bed and tried to get some sleep. Well, now I have a question for you. The captain said that all would be well. He told everyone on board that they should just mind their time. All will be well. Wait till the morning, because the tide will change, the water will fill the reef, and we will be able to go on our way. Just go back to bed. Would you have trusted the captain? Would you have listened to the captain? What did they do? Were they able to get off that reef? Well, I guess you'll have to come back and maybe I'll let you know.
Oh, a little weekend. We're gonna wanna come back soon for that, right? So now we'll have a 10-minute break, washroom, water, snacks. I wanted to mention, since Margaret's done such a good job of advertising herself, I wanted to mention Margaret is doing a free workshop here. Where is it? Yeah, it's here. No, thank you. Here on Saturday, May 7th, all day. For a beginning storytelling workshop, and she is an amazing teacher. If you want more information about that, you can go to the Mid-Island Storytelling website, that's our website, or go to the Round Town Tellers website, which is the Nanaimo Storytelling Group website, and you'll find all that information about that there. That's all I want to say at this moment. So enjoy your 10-minute break and find out what
Take you back to the reef.
Yeah.
Recap. Sophia, 245 feet of her entrenched, fully entrenched on that reef, right in the middle of the Lynn Canal. 367 passengers and crew. Don't forget the horses. Don't forget the dogs. You know, it sounds like a terrible thing. And the unusual topic of collisions in Alaska waters is all too common. It's unbelievable. Every day there are ships, small and large, that will collide with small and large elements, whether they're on rock or in the water or another ship. For Sophia, it was round 4. Being on the reef was round 4. In April 1913, she ran aground at Alert Bay. And then that fall, she had hit a submerged log. And again, she had to be brought into dry dock with damage to her stern. The following January in 1914, she ran aground at Sentinel Island. But this was a very different level of problem. And one of the big issues is wind and current. So Captain Locke gathered all passengers in groups of 75 in the dining hall. Some of them arrived fully clothed with their heavy gear on and their flotation devices with suitcases in hand. No, he said, no. If anything, he was going to be the epitome of calm. To add to the problem, influenza, Spanish flu, the Spanish lady was running rampant at that time, and 8 cases were on board. So he knew that calm was the word of the day. And he assured them, look outside, look out one of these great picture windows. What do you see? Well, we see ships, they said. Yes, you see them right around you, the flotilla to help us should we need it. But here's the plan. We're going to wait till high tide when the water washes over the rock. And then, only then will we offload passengers in a very quiet, calm, organized way onto the lifeboats. And you will join these boats that are now circling the reef. Well, he was calm. How much they believed him, I do not know. But that was comforting to see that flotilla of boats. That was very comforting. And how did they get there? Frank Lowell. There are names in the story that need to be flashed. Frank Lowell was the CPR agent in Juneau. And at 3:15, the Juneau Harbor had notified him about the stranding of Sophia on the rock. He jumped out of bed and went down to the dock and ordered the small boats now up to Vanderbilt Reef. Sophia has been stranded on the reef. They looked at him and said, do you know what's going on in the Lynn Canal? Now, 367 people, he said. And I think if he could have picked them up, he would have. The Amy and the Estevad said, we're gone. Several of us said, I can't. In the morning, several did go out. And there were 7 that were circulating right around the reef and the ship. I'm sure that would have brought comfort to them. I'm sure. Captain Locke looked at Jerry Shaw, his first mate, and said, wheelhouse, Jerry, I need to speak with you. Now, of course, there was no one in the wheelhouse. They were entrenched on a rock. He needed to talk to his first mate. And he looked at him and he said, you know what I'm worried about, Jerry? He said, you're worried? You know what I'm worried about, Jerry? Clallam. Oh, God, said Jerry. Now, the Clallam, Clallam, was the SS Clallam that a few years earlier had come into a similar situation down in the Juan de Fuca Straits. Almost identical situation. Was stranded up on a rock. Deep seas, big winds, northeasterly winds, and just foundering on the rock. The captain made a decision. Lifeboats out, all the women and children into the lifeboats. It was a tough decision. You don't do it lightly. 54 women and children were placed in those lifeboats. And everyone on board watched as they were swamped and died. The Clallam, said Captain Locke. Remember the Clallam? And Jerry said, no, Captain, no. And he said to Jerry, there'll be no Clallam on my watch. And with that, he looked out at the flotilla of rescue ships and said, this is not working. Look at them. They can hardly hold position. They're small fishing boats. They could take, what, 5 in that one? 10 maybe in there? We're going to ferry out 367 people to 7 different ships? No, he said. And he went in to see David Robinson, the wireless operator, and sent a radiogram and said to Juneau, I need a larger ship now. We need to have one that can pull as many people, and if need be, pull us off this rock. Well, that sounded like a plan. And it was Frank Lowell at the other end who said, leave it with me, Captain. And Frank Lowell went right back down to the pier in Juneau, and there was the ship and wing, the King and Wing. The King and Wing was already tied up at the dock. And he went over to the skipper and said, Captain, you're needed now up at Vanderbilt Reef. Not happening, not going to happen, said the captain. I'm a private ship and I need permission to do anything that dangerous. Do you know what's happening up in the canal? Of course I do. And this went on for an hour and a half, begging him to take that ship, arguing that he could not. Back on the ship, the dance continued. The passengers were told, keep your flotation devices handy. We'll now prepare you to tell you which lifeboat you would be getting into. Well, half of them were feeling very comforted by these boats on the outside, and the ship was not listing. She was fully entrenched on that reef, and they were feeling, if not calm, fairly confident. Meanwhile, Frank Lowell was making all kinds of arrangements in Juneau. I've got 367 people that are coming off those boats, and I want to have accommodation and food and shelter and comfort ready for them. He went around to every single hotel in Juneau, and he asked to book rooms that were available, and he couldn't find them in that hotel. He went off and found them in private residences and anywhere he could, and he found rooms for 367 people that afternoon and stabling for 24 horses. And the 5 pooches. That wasn't all. Frank Lowell knew that the Orpheum Theater had been closed temporarily. These people will want to eat. Can we not open up the Orpheum? We'll have to get a lot of help from the hotels and some of the restaurants. We need to feed these people. And he opened up the Orpheum. He had heat, water, and food on standby because he was convinced that this rescue was going to happen. Meanwhile, on the ship, Lulu May said, well, I'm a singer and a dancer, and these people are in trouble. And she invited them all down to the social hall. We're just going to have a sing-along. Really? They came. They came with their heavy coats and their suitcases and their flotation devices. But they came. They came with their hopes and their dreams and their fears. And she pounded out on that piano. Hail, hail, the gang's all here. What the heck do we care? What the heck do we care? And they sang with her. She even got into Katie, beautiful Katie. Well, this was her, right? She just lit up the room with the gift she had. And for a few moments, it helped. The tension was high on board, you can't imagine. So the ships would come in a little closer, but then Captain Locke saw that they were all just being whipped by the surf, by the wind, and the currents. And they too would be running aground if he didn't do something. He put on his greatcoat, he took the megaphone. These ships do not have wireless communication. He took the megaphone, went out on deck, and called them off. No, wait for my signal. And he shouted at each captain at each ship, on the Amy, the Estebeth, the Peterson, the Lone Fisherman, and the rest. And he said, go to Sentinel Island. Wait, I'll give you the signal. And they were relieved. They were relieved. They were being battered and blown, jeopardizing their own vessels. And off they went to Sentinel Island. He got his wish. The king and wing arrived reluctantly, but she arrived at 6:30. She came with a reporter and a photographer. Ready. They knew a news item. They could smell that. But the ship could handle at least 100 people. More importantly, she had a coreless engine. And Captain Locke knew that if push came to shove, that we could pull Sophia off that reef before we started to offload the passengers. That was a plan in the air. By 8 o'clock, the Cedar finally arrived. It was the lighthouse tender. It was the largest ship there available in the area, Captain John Ledbetter. Captain John Ledbetter was a man of action and knew exactly what to do in a crisis. He arrived at 8 o'clock and put the searchlights right on Sophia, took one look at the situation, and he had wireless communication. And he got in touch with Captain Locke and said, "You don't mean to offload anybody tonight." And Captain Locke said, "No, we cannot." Can you imagine offloading 367 people into that wind and storm and snow in darkness, no matter how big the searchlight you have? Well, it got so bad out in the canal that now even the large ships were being buffeted and blown about. And Captain Ledbetter on the Cedar, the largest ship, said, this I cannot do. I'm going to have to ask permission to withdraw to the shelter of the island, which he did. Radiogram to Captain Locke, and he said, "Go, we will not move until king tide at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning." Well, that night, to add to the misery, one of the steam pipes burst on Sophia. They lost electrical. They were in the full dark. So think of it, full dark, no heat, and now everyone is hearing the howling wind, and they're hearing that grinding against the hull, that ship buffeted against the rock. I can't imagine. I know what Lulu was doing. She took those jewels out of that chamois bag. She wanted them even closer, and she sewed them into every pocket and hem of her dress and coat. That's what she did. Horace McQueen wrote to his mother. He said, "It feels like we're on a movie set for a horror movie. I'm just waiting for the vampire." It's astonishing that we are not all awash in the deep sea. It must have been a very difficult night. Few of them slept that night. And in the morning, we're now Friday morning, October 25th, 4 a.m., all the ship was awake. King tide was at 5 a.m. All passengers were at the ready. But a full northwestern wind came right down the channel with a blizzard force. Again, buffeting the ship on that rock. And all the other ships started coming in to help and surround them. And even Captain Ledbetter and even the King and Wing could not stand around them. They were being buffeted so badly, they canceled the rescue of 5 a.m. Those passengers, I can't imagine. Well, they said 9 o'clock. We'll see what happens after the wind abates and the sea is calmer, and we will try again. At 9 o'clock, gale force winds developed. It was now a stronger storm than the day before. We cannot possibly move anyone off Sophia. Captain Ledbetter was a man of action. He said, there must be a way that we can organize some kind of transfer of these people, even if it's one by one. And he considered, and this is how desperate it got, Breach's Buoy, Breaches buoy is when the ship lines up with another, sends a great cable across, manufactures some kind of a seat where you send passengers one by one from one ship to the other in a full blizzard.
Oh, I don't think so.
Exactly. No. And of course, they have wireless communication. So Captain Ledbetter on the Cedar and Captain Locke on the Sophia immediately said no. So this dance, this waxing and waning of a rescue was all dependent on wind and currents. And no one realized exactly what was happening on Sophia. That's the interesting part. The ships had to retire to Sentinel Island, which was 4 miles south of the reef. That was the safest place. There was a lighthouse there, and they could safely await the signal from the captain to come for the offloading, to continue the rescue. Meanwhile, on Sophia, that slice in the hull received such a pounding over the last almost 40 hours on the reef that it had widened and water was now rushing in. Great, deep ocean water flooding in. They heard nothing from Sophia. But Captain Ledbetter was determined, and he rallied his group and said, we need to go back and see what's going on the reef. They attempted to leave Sentinel Island, come out into the canal, but they couldn't. They were so buffeted, he couldn't see beyond the bow of his boat. Now it was full winter blizzard, and he was putting his own vessel and crew in jeopardy. At 4 o'clock, things had greatly deteriorated on Sophia. By 10 to 5, Captain Ledbetter was on the Cedar and was listening for any communication. They were just glued to the communication station. What was the news from Sophia? And all they heard was this message: come quickly. Come quickly. Ship foundering en reef. And the operator looked at the captain and said, I couldn't hear clearly. I couldn't take the code clearly. I think he might have said pounding on the reef. And they all prayed that it was pounding and not foundering on the reef. Let's prepare again, said the captain. We'll go back out. We'll go back to the canal. And he took all their lives in his hands, and they headed back to the Lynn Canal, but could not even round the corner. The wind buffeted them so much. He said, I cannot. As he returned to the safety of Sentinel Island, the second radiogram came in from Sophia. For God's sake, hurry. The water is in my room. Now, if the water is in the room of the wireless operator is just behind the wheelhouse, we are in serious trouble. And they attempted to keep communication open. Hold tight, we will come when we can, was the message that they kept sending over and over. Sophia never responded. All night, they kept the channels open, praying, waiting. All night, they heard nothing from Sophia. In the morning, finally, the storm had somewhat abated. It was still snowing, but the wind had gone down considerably. And the seas were approachable. So Captain Ledbetter signaled to the others that it was time. The flotilla of boats all came out, rounded the point, looked up into the canal. Well, no one could believe their eyes. No one could believe their eyes. Vanderbilt Reef was bare. Later, much later, one of the crew on the Cedar wrote, "My eyes were deceiving me. My eyes could not process what I saw. It was unbelievable, where there had been a ship with 367 people and cargo and horses and dogs, was now 20 feet of mast sticking up out of the south end of the reef. 20 feet of mast. They were devastated. Every man on every rescue ship knew. We will just navigate here for hours. We will find the survivors. There has to be. They can't all be gone. The rescue ships circumnavigated the reef all that Saturday. They knew that hope was minimal, but they tried. They knew they had to try. Over the next 2 days, they recovered 100 bodies, but they were scattered all over. Some were 30, 40 miles southward of the reef, and they realized the wind and the current would take them. There was an urgency now. We needed to find these people, because if not, they would have been swept out to the ocean. They needed to find them. So they continued the search. They brought in a greater flotilla. More boats came in. And they scoured the islands, the coves, the beaches. These are snow-covered beaches now. These are rock faces. They went and looked everywhere and slowly saw the awful truth. They found the wooden lifeboats. The steel lifeboats were long gone. In Juneau, when Frank Lowell heard the news, he was devastated. He was devastated. He had spent the last 2 days getting accommodation, food, comfort for everyone. And now he had to revamp the plan. It was no longer rescue, it was recovery. Juneau would be the center for this recovery. And he was bound and determined he would honor every person that they found and make every effort to find every person they could. And then a bright light, miracle of miracles, a survivor, one of the four-legged, the English setter. He made it across the icy water to one of the smaller islands. They found him shivering and cold and coated in oil. They found him, the lone survivor. Well, the rescue went on for many days. 180 bodies were recovered within the next 2 weeks. And Juneau, the people of Juneau stepped up. They said, we were receiving those who were going to come off the ship, and we will receive them still. And the women prepared the bodies of the women passengers who were brought in, and the men prepared the bodies of the male passengers who were brought in, and they honored them. When the press came to speak to the mayor and say, we need a list of these people in Juneau, you people have stepped up, it's amazing. We need the list of the people here in Juneau who did this remarkable work. And the mayor looked at the journalist and said, the list? Here's the list, all of Juneau, the town of Juneau, and their governor, Thomas Riggs. If I celebrate Frank Lowell, and I will continue to celebrate Frank Lowell, Thomas Riggs, you need to remember, he was the young, clever governor, a newly elected governor to Alaska. Now, yes, Sophia was a Canadian ship, but the accident was in American waters. So Governor Riggs stepped up to the plate. You need an organizer, I am the man. And he was right there, center and core. Hands-on, this man was involved in the rescue operations on land and sea. He asked Captain Ledbetter if he could use the Cedar as an on-the-water operation front where we could control the flotilla of boats that were going a 90-mile radius looking to recover people. He did that with Frank Lowell. He also was the go-to when it came to communication with the press, with the families, with CP, with the law, with the police, and certainly with the public. He was the one. Now, in all this, a lot of bodies were never recovered. One of them was Captain Locke, and nor was the logbook. So the questions started. And of course, the inevitable finger pointing. Couldn't he have done this? Shouldn't he have done that? How come they all died? Couldn't they? Shouldn't they? And Governor Riggs stopped it all with a proclamation that went into the press. We are here to honor the people on Sophia. We are here to help them as we can, in any way we can. And blaming and pointing is fruitless. Let us be true Alaskans. Well, that helped for a while. Interesting twist in the story. CP, it was now November, called off the recovery. The weather, the climate, we cannot jeopardize our boats and our people. It was called off. Well, that didn't sit well with a lot of people. We've only recovered 180. So where are the rest of them? They're probably still on the boat. They're probably somewhere. You're calling off the recovery. They did. Enter Al Winchell. Al Winchell lived in Alaska, and he was working for Yukon Gold at the time. But he and his wife, Eileen, were a very devoted couple. And Eileen was not feeling well that fall, and Al, who truly loved his wife, said, you need to go back to California. You need to go back and get some sunshine and put that bloom back in your cheeks. And I will get you a first-class passage on that Sophia. Well, we know what happened to poor Eileen. But before she got on the boat, and this preoccupation and knowing fascinates me, she said, Al, should anything happen to me, you need to bury me with my mother in San Francisco. Good heavens, woman, he said. There's no need to worry about such things. You're on a first-class ship, you're going to be wined and dined, and you're going to join your family. Al, promise me. And he did. So, when Al heard they called off the rescue and recovery operation, that did not sit well with him. He was a man who kept his promise. And he went to Juneau at his own expense and hired a boat with 2 divers. And he went to the reef and he went down on the boat and watched as the divers came up and said, well, there are actually people on the boat. Number 35 was her stateroom. There's actually people in 35. That's my wife, he said. And they brought up rings that they found in stateroom 35. They did not belong to Eileen. He brought up 4 bodies None of them were his beloved Eileen. He was so distressed. But here's where it got interesting with the public. They said, you've got private citizens hiring boats and divers to go down, pulling up 4 people? What kind of an operation is Canadian Pacific? Get a boat out there. They did. They got a bigger boat with 4 divers. And they found 86 bodies. One of them was his beloved Eileen. At that, you would think it was the beginning of the end of the story. But it came to the understanding of CP that there was gold bullion in that. Well, they lost no time in getting a ship out there. Divers were down there faster than you can say Princess Sophia. And came up with $60,000 worth of gold bullion. Oh, the Alaskans were ripping now. The lawsuits started. The lawsuits, the descendants from the crew members, the descendants from the family members, and none of it came to pass. None of it was successful. The captain and CP were exonerated. Perils at sea. However, I must say that these Alaskans and the people of the North pursued it and said, workman's compensation, just a moment. Workman's compensation. Well, that was defeated at its original suit because they said, yes, there's Canadian workman's compensation. Sorry, it happened in American waters. There is no workman's compensation in Alaska. They appealed and it went to the provincial court who agreed and said, no, there's no workman's compensation. This mighty group sent it to the Privy Council in England and got them to overturn it, and they received, the descendants of the crew, some of them, received a modest compensation from workman's compensation. Finally, one of the set of divers cut off the 20 feet of mast, and it would seem now that that was the end of Sophia's story. Not so. March 2022. My favorite site is Sophia. I dive there almost weekly. For me, it's the full cycle of life. For me, it's a place of peace and comfort. Yes, every hope and dream that was on that ship, well, came down into that vessel, that container. But I have to tell you, when I go down, I am welcomed. Those plumous anemones, you know, those great underwater creatures, they greet me and say, thank you. Thank you for coming. And tell our story. Remember our story. And the life below is teeming. The great Pacific octopus. Why, there's lingcod, there's halibut. Seals come and play and scoot in and out of that wreck. Well, she's no wreck. She's that sweet ship of dreams. And here we are, remembering. And I am so grateful to each one here and to you, wherever you are watching and listening, because sharing these hopes and dreams keeps them alive. And we've kept her story alive. Princess Sophia. And with that, I wish you all a very good night.
Good story, all right.
Wow,
Yeah.
what a story, what a ship, what a storyteller, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. I just wanted to, a reminder about Margaret's workshop on May 7th. You can get information on our website or around Town Tellers. Also there's the National Storytelling Conference is here in Parksville on in May, the end of May at Nanaimo. People can take part in a day or of the whole conference, or there are two concerts also, two storytelling concerts that are part of the conference. One on Friday night, it's the weekend of the 27th, isn't it? Yeah, so one on Friday night and one on Saturday night. The one Friday night is at Nanaimo, and the one Saturday night, it's May 27th, 28th. The one on Saturday night is at Knox United. And they are storytellers from all over Canada who come for this conference and who will be telling stories on both of those nights. Be great evenings. Information about the conference and those concerts are outside on the table, so you can check those out as you go.
And they will be live streamed as well.
Right, yes, they will be. Now, in terms of the rest of our season, this is it, because due to the planning for the conference, we decided that we would cancel our last slice of life. But there is another opportunity to catch some of these wonderful storytellers. Marva, who's in the back there, Marva Blackmore, and Lee Porteous, who's a storyteller from Victoria. They are going to be in a show on, sorry, I got this all over the place, March 31st, down in Duncan, at the Duncan Showroom. And it also will be live streamed, so there will be opportunities to get Zoom tickets as well. Go to our website, the Mid-Island Storytellers. The name of their story evening is Tall Tales, Half Truths and Some Lies. So that will be, and if you're on our email list, we'll send you all the info about our next season, that type of stuff. And now we will bid our online people adieu. And thank you very much for joining us. If you have any comments or questions for Margaret, you who in TV land, then you can simply email us at Mid-Island Storytelling and tell us what you think or what questions you might have. And we'll make sure that Margaret gets that information and that we get it back to you.
But
Yeah.
thank you.
So, bye.
Bye.
Hi guys.
And for the rest of us, if